Okay. So this year, first off, welcome everyone, and welcome to Photo Society 2023. This is a treat. And this year, a little bit different. Now, Whitney has passed on the mantle to Matt. So Matt Everett will be there, and he's the one who basically will be running the meeting along with me. So I look forward to working with you, Matt.
Yeah, I look forward to working with everyone. Let me know if anyone has any questions or suggestions or any meeting topics they want. We're happy to work with you guys.
Actually, while we're mentioning that, before I even begin, you know, Matt and I have been talking about trying to do things a little different, and we obviously want everyone's input. And you know, everyone is busy, so it's always difficult when we send out a survey, and I'm as guilty of it as everyone else. They don't always get filled up. I mean, I have a million of these kind of things, and I say, I'll do it later, and later never happens. So maybe in the next meeting, we'll have something right during the meeting. We'll stop for a few minutes, or let something, maybe we'll run through some photos or something, but that will allow you to complete the survey. And the reason for the survey is so that we can get a better idea of what you guys would like. I mean, Matt and I are both, you know, certified geniuses, and we know everything, but just in case we're something that we don't get, it'd be good to be able to get feedback. One of the things that, in talking to from some of the surveys that we did get back, and then from talking to some of the other people, Sue, there's no drinking during this meeting.
Coffee.
That we'd try to get the a kind of a balance in each of the meetings, so that we will have, you know, some photo stuff, you know, whether, you know, talking about the either a trip or just techniques of the photos, and then other editing presentations. But I think maybe we got into too much of the editing, because there were some people had mentioned that thought it seemed like a more of a computer group than a photo group. So keeping that in mind, what I think I'm trying to keep a balance of what, or will try to keep a balance of all the different things presented. If anybody has any ideas or you know, or suggestions, you know, please just feel free either to let Matt know, let me know. It's never going to be perceived as a complaint. That's the only way we can get things or presentations that are more valid. So, and before we begin tonight's meeting, the next two meetings will be a little different. Next, the February meeting will be a Bon Air night, and there's a bunch of people that have gone on recently on some of the Undersea Divers trips to Bon Air. And so they will be presenting. If anybody else has gone there recently, I'm sure you can contact Matt, and there'll definitely be room. And then in March, it's just going to be an equipment night. I mean, that may sound dull as dirt, but I think nobody, very few people just take the camera out of the box and then use it as is. Everybody does their own personal modification, whether it's a physical modification or use something with it or an approach. So what we're hoping is that in the March meeting, everyone can talk about what they do. And it doesn't have to be super technical. I'll mention you, Andrea. I remember years ago, and not that long ago, you used a dive light for your main source of light with your camera. If you told anybody else that, they'd be slapping their forehead and they'd say they did what? But it worked and your pictures told the story. I mean, you had some great stuff. So that's the kind of thing I'm thinking about. I mean, it can be some hardware that you have put together that, or just something that you do when you use the camera that you do use. Maybe not everyone else has that same camera, but they may have one that's similar. So that's something that we can all share, and I think we'll all benefit by it. So I'll definitely give you some, or we'll give you some prompts along the way, just as a reminder, and then we'll get people to schedule or to commit to doing it. It doesn't mean that you have to do a half an hour on the handle that you put on your housing or camera. No, it's just anything. You can be on for 5 minutes, and we'll just share that so everyone gets to see what Andrea does with the lights, or what Daryl does with his camera. And it's that sort of thing. And I think as a group, we'll all benefit. So that said, I'd like to begin tonight. Tonight, we have 3 great presenters. We'll be beginning with Paul Erickson, who will be talking about how nature uses color to repel and disguise its and fool its prey. Daryl will then Tom Gately will be talking about, giving us a lot of good information. We're all familiar with Tom, and Tom will be talking about, he has what he calls Bookshelf and Bookmarks, the top 10. So there'll be sources of information for us to be able to, improve our photography. And then while we're improving our photography, Daryl Finley will come on and will wrap things up by talking about composition and subject selection, which is something that every photographer deals with every time he has a camera in his or her hand. So Paul is someone that I've known for a very long time. That's why we both have gray hair, because we've known each other for a very long time. And Paul has worked, it's been the voice of the New England Aquarium for many years, worked with WGBH, both the radio and the TV, of doing nature segments. I had the pleasure of working with Paul on 2 books for young readers in the last few years that were published. So it gives me great pleasure. It sounds like a cliche, but it really does. It is. If I could introduce Paul to begin his presentation.
So I'll just share screen here. I'm not a technological wizard.
There it is. And now just begin your program, Paul, and that's it. Good, good.
Okay, I'd like to thank, first of all, Matt for helping me set this up. He's much more knowledgeable about Zoom technology, that's for sure. And this is an abridged version of a longer program, but I want to make sure there's plenty of room for all the other speakers. So here we go. Again, thank you, Andy, for inviting me to speak. I also kind of wanted to repay Andrew by showing you his 9th grade science project, his first diving suit. And as you can tell, when he was in 9th grade in high school, he was very clever. And he also he also had a mustache back then. He started early with puberty and all that. And next, I'd like to just show you some colorful creatures I've really photographed with film over the years. So sit back and enjoy a brief spectrum of photons. I'm locked in here, Andy.
Try the escape key.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to go back to the,
No, hit the escape key.
no, nothing. Interesting. Can I, let's see, I'm gonna stop share. Go back to the program. I'm going to try to share again. Oh, okay. So first of all, I'd like to show you some aposematic warning colors. What kind of feeling do you get when, let's say you're having a picnic or a cookout and a yellow striped stinging insect shows up? If you feel a little on edge, you have experienced aposematic or warning colors, and like the ones on this cicada killer. By the way, we do have cicada killers around here. They look like a huge hornet, but they are non-aggressive. The male doesn't even sting, and the female sting is not that bad. But when we were kids, we used to go butterfly collecting, and our butterfly nets were bully magnets. So when the bullies showed up and asked us, it was New Jersey, they called us little punks. The kids would show up on their Stingray bicycles and harass us and ask, make fun of our butterfly nets. We just pull one of these guys out and they take off. We never saw them again. They thought we were crazy to be messing around with creatures like this. Another aposematic type of animal, I photographed this Spanish dancer in the Red Sea. And the aposematic, the warning colors, the red color, probably fends off other animals that know that it's toxic. And by the way, the toxin that the Spanish dancer holds is from eating a certain kind of sponge. And the toxin in the sponge is transferred to the tissue of the nudibranch. By the way, the chemical, the toxin, is being used experimentally, being tested by pharmaceutical companies because it kills a fungus, a human type of fungus. So it's like a lot of marine creatures. It's being studied for possible use in pharmaceuticals. And around here, we have the red eft, which is the terrestrial form of the eastern red newt, eastern newt, and its red color is a warning that it contains TTX or tetrodotoxin, the same kind of toxin you find in pufferfish, although apparently there's not enough in the red F to kill a human, fortunately, although I don't know anybody who's ever tasted one, but apparently it's enough to fend off or to be distasteful or even fatal to small creatures that might want to attack that red eft. And then there are identification colors, species identification. And let's take a quick trip to the Red Sea, which looks like a sea slug crawling up the side of Africa. And at the bottom of the Sinai, maybe some of you have been here, at the bottom of the Sinai Desert up in the upper left, the triangular shape is an area that's very popular with divers, extremely clear water. This is kind of the Red Sea look. You get soft corals blooming with all of these orange fairy basslets, also called, well, it's an anthias, also called jewelfish. And this is taken inside a cave. The slide isn't upside down. The fish are substrate oriented to the roof of the cave. For every 8 to 10 of these anthias, these are all females, the orange ones, there's a male. And if anything happens to that male, like if a grouper comes along and eats it, no problem, because within about 2 weeks, it will transform into a fully functional female. So in the anthias world, the idea is the males are expendable. I'm glad that's not true in our culture, but if a male gets killed, no big deal, we'll make more. So that's important for their social structure. Okay, interesting, I'm locked in again. Oh yeah, so the female becomes a male. There we go. One of my favorite movies is Yellow Submarine, where George Harrison in the cartoon says, it's all in the mind, you know. And that's true with colors. So when we see light in color, we're detecting just the skinny part of the electromagnetic spectrum in the visible range. As you probably know, there's so many more types of energy in the electromagnetic spectrum. And what is an electromagnetic spectrum? Well, it's a vast expanse of energy present throughout the universe, traveling at the speed of light in the form of electric and magnetic waves. And to get technical, those energy waves have characteristics of both waves and particles. And that's the sum total of everything I remember from physics classes. And I think I got about a C+, so I wasn't really a great physics student, but I passed. And that's all I remember. So light entering your eye, this is the retina would be on the right side of the screen. We have three different kinds of color receptors. We have blue, green, and red cones. The black ones are rods, which sense lights and darks. So what happens is when the light enters and is picked up by the cones in the form of colored wavelengths, if you will, here's what happens. You get a cascade of chemical reactions. Okay, you got that memorized? And it sends an electrical signal to the brain, and it's this cascade. It's almost like one of these Rube Goldberg cartoons where one thing leads to another. This guy's got an apparatus for reminding him to mail his wife's letter. And some animals, well, really all animals probably see things a little differently. I don't know if you've seen An Immense World, but this book goes into great detail. It's a wonderful book about how animals see different colors, like insects can see into the infrared range, and some people can see a little bit into the infrared range. And in the case of the peacock mantis, this is one of Andrew's photos. You can see how sharp it is. The quality of Andrew's photos are known around the world. I do consider Andrew one of the best 10 photographers, underwater photographers in the world. And I've met a lot of them. So I really mean that. This mantis shrimp has cones, has receptors that can pick up 9 different types of wavelengths, including polarized, they call circular polarized light. And they can make warning signals to each other, and people can't see the flickering colors or the signal, the light that it's transmitting as a warning, and nor can many fish see that. So it can communicate secretly with other mantis shrimps. And okay, so how does nature form colors? Well, a number of different ways. For example, the iron in the rocks of Bryce Canyon, that's forming light waves reflected off chemical pigments. And then there are light interference and dispersion patterns, such as, soap bubbles. If you've ever caught a mahi-mahi fish and it starts to form rainbows, that's light interference and dispersion, or one or the other, I'm not sure. And this principle also takes place in giant clam mantles, such as this one. And then finally, there is fluorescence. So, where are the colors you see? Do they just exist in your mind? Think about it. And I have a feeling Tom knows about this too, so maybe you can discuss it with him. Is a red sponge really red? Well, it's reflecting red. So in a sense, it's anything or everything but red. Is there really such a thing as a rainbow? Or is it just something going on in the back of your mind? Do you dream in color? How do we do that? So color can be well, ethereal, perplexing, hard to kind of wrap your head around. I'm just grateful it's part of our lives, and we have at least 3 receptor types of cones that I don't know, I find colors addictive. It adds so much to our lives. I think that's one reason people will pay thousands and thousands of dollars to go halfway around the world to photograph some colorful little sea slug. You know what it's like to be addicted to that, I'm sure. But what about colors underwater, and how are we doing for time here? I'll speed this up. As you may have experienced in clear water, we really lose the light waves as soon as you take a dive. By about 30 feet, many of the red wavelengths have been filtered out. So it's once you get down to 100, 150 feet, it's a blue world down there. This was a cave we were in deep water in the Solomon Islands. And everything's blue unless you bring your own lights, which of course simulate the color temperature of the sun. So you can see the real color of things as if they had been brought to the surface. Well, another type of coloration, surprise and startle, such as the Polyphemus moth that showed up in our backyard a few years ago, just showed up. And the false eye spots on many types of butterflies and moths are thought to be able to startle predators, probably birds. When they unfold the wings, the eyes appear that simulates perhaps the eyes of a predatory owl. And they probably can fend off some predators by showing these eye spots. And you've also seen some false eye spots underwater too, I'm sure. In fact, we were up I didn't take this photo, but I saw this moth up in Montreal at the insectarium, and the tops of its wings, it's called a cobra moth, because the tops of its wings imitate the head and neck of a cobra, perhaps enough to chase off potential predators that know that, let's say, a king cobra is not somebody you want to pick a fight with. Then there's camouflage. I'm speeding up here a little just to save time for everybody else. And a little story here, we were in Fiji, and I was holding on to the top of a reef, holding on to a dead piece of coral so I could steady myself in the current and take a picture. Well, I looked to the left of my hand and there was a stonefish. It was so well camouflaged and even had some algae growing on it that I instantly became very thankful that I hadn't picked this thing to put my hand on, because I could have gotten a bad sting and it probably would be an airlift from the boat to some hospital and extraordinary pain, and then trying to surface in extraordinary pain. So I just consider myself living a charmed life. And then the camouflage of the crocodile fish that you may have seen. This was from the Red Sea, and they inhabit coral rubble habitats, which are quite interesting. And then also in the Red Sea, one night I was out over by almost by the Egypt, Saudi Arabia border. You don't want to get too close to Saudi diving over there. The gunboats will come out after you. But I saw these little eyes staring up at me with a camouflaged kind of skin surface that looked like the sand. I cleared some of the sand away, and it's the first time I'd ever run into a marbled stargazer. And this is another one of Andy's photos. I think it's probably from Indonesia. And of course, it's one of Andy's high quality photos. It's the best example I've ever seen of underwater camouflage. The octopus here, if you haven't already noticed it, it's from the upper right to the lower left, with the eye in the upper right. Then there's fraud, deception, and mimicry. Fraud and deception don't just take place in Washington, D.C. In fact, this was a a giant frogfish we photographed in the Philippines, and it basically protects itself by looking like, not like a fish. It looks like a type of sponge perhaps, because it just lies on its side and doesn't move. So it's simulating, it's like many of the creatures in the coral triangle out there that simulate either dead things or seaweed, debris, or in this case, probably a sponge or a group of tunicates. And disruptive colors, back to the Philippines, we filmed some venomous catfish that they basically confuse potential predators, almost like creating a type of pop art. So thanks for tuning in. Now get ready for our friend Tom Gately, who is, as you know, brings a remarkable skill set. I've seen the last show that he did here as both an interesting balance of an artist and speaker, but you probably already know that. So I'm looking forward to seeing Tom's show. And I guess I will exit stage left and just watch what else is going on. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. That was great, and that was a great presentation on to begin the season in the Photo Society. Just to talk a little bit about the importance of color, which is what we are striving to capture, but it's the animals are using it for something else in addition to our beauty.
And Andrew, thank you for that nice introduction, although you didn't mention that I have been known to embellish my resume, but then I'm not running for Congress, so. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you again, Paul. That was a great way to start it off. And now, as Paul said, we have Tom Gately, who we all know is a photographer, is very skilled photographer. And it's given us presentations before. And this one, when he mentioned that he had this as a possible topic, and I just jumped at it because we're all thirsting for information on photography, on editing and photography. And this presentation should hit the mark. So Tom, if you can, do you have to unshare Paul?
Yeah, I think Paul is unshared at this point.
Okay, good.
Yep.
Now,
Yeah, no, I can share and do mine. So yeah, I'm gonna pull it up in just a sec. I don't know if you can see behind me, but Paul, I really like the Nutcracker Suite. I think I should have started off maybe with Pink Floyd. I'm thinking, Shine On You Crazy Diamond is what I should be doing for, especially when you got to the Dazed and Confused and the abstract colors.
You have good taste.
It's funny. I was watching a movie last night, and that was playing. I was like, this is a great song. So with that, let me so if you guys just want to get bored with whatever I'm talking about, you can always just look back at the lava lamp. This is how I spend my days when I'm working. So let me just share the screen here, and you're gonna let me know when you've got it up, so you should have it. And let me do a presentation here.
Yep.
Okay, you got it all? I'm gonna have to switch presenter and whatnot here for a moment. Let's go presenter mode. You guys get to see all the behind the scenes stuff. So when you're looking behind me, you probably saw the bookshelves. I am a kind of a book nut, obviously. Everything that I've never been an art student, so to speak. I kind of wish I'd gone back. I got my BS in geology, and I'm a crisis management consultant by day. And I was thinking, if I could go back in time, I'd probably try to get an MFA in art because I just enjoy it so much. A lot of self-study with it. And what I wanted to go through tonight was just kind of the things, the books and resources that I've come across that I think have really helped me understand art better. And let me be clear, I'm so far from, I'm self-taught. I'm so far from considering myself an artist because there's just such tremendous work and artists out there. But the things that I'm going to show over in the next, pick my top 10, so to speak, were ones that I found either inspiring or ones that when I'd go to bed at night, I'd read a little bit of it and I would just think about it. And it would be something that caused me to think for, be occupied and sometimes have trouble sleeping. It same kind of result, I guess, sometimes when I go to like Museum of Art, the Boston Museum of Art, and same kind of reaction as I'd look and stare and just study just one piece for a bit. And then I come back at home at night and I'd be like, wow, what was it about that I just really, really loved? So this is more just kind of my Sophie's choice of my bookshelves of everything that I go in. And like I said, as I tend not to read these things straight through, with the exception of a couple of them, they're much more of ones I found that I'm like, I want to learn a little bit more about intent, or a little bit more about, how we perceive things, or a little bit more about the science behind it. And I would go to particular books and kind of like, and look to specific subjects. And over time, I essentially got through all of these, but it really was kind of a Sophie's choice, trying to picture, pull out what I was going to talk about. The first one I want to talk out, and when I start with saying, here are my top 10, and I'm going to do I'm trying to blank. Not Chuck Berry. Who did the top 10 countdown in the 80s? It was, the top 100 countdown, the pop hits, and I'm trying to remember. It's. I'm just going to go.
Casey Kasem.
Casey Kasem. I used to love those. Yes, thank you. So this is not so much a definitive down to 10 down. It was hard enough to pick which ones I included, so this isn't in any particular order, and I tried my best to just try to say everything, but I would throw them all up there if I could. But I wanted to start with Michael Freeman's stuff, and the reason being is that Michael Freeman, if you've ever read any of his books, and I've got The Photographer's Mind up here because I think he does such a great job of getting inside kind of the mind of a photographer and thinking about composition and thinking about what it is you want to portray, and then he's one of the few writers that really, in a straightforward style in all of his books. And I put one book up here, but anything by Michael Freeman is fantastic. He does such a great job of articulating not only the fundamentals of the mechanics, but also the process of being an artist and trying to translate whatever that vision is. So if you get a chance, I love Michael Freeman's stuff. But probably his best work out of everything, and you'll see just he's very prolific in terms of writing, is a college course that he taught, because he's also a professor and teaches photography. It's literally a book called The Fundamentals of Photography, and it's photography school. And these days you can get it in several volumes, or you can get it in one large book kind of a thing. But it was really based on his 15-week foundation course in photography, which I think is one of the go-to books. If everybody says, hey, I want to learn something about photography, where do I go to start? That's the type of book that I think is fantastic if people like to do it. I will do a side note that there is a ton of video options out there. I'm not as much about a video person. I'll go there for like certain techniques and certain post-processing software or something. But I find actually my attention is more grabbed by being able to have a book in my hand, or my iPad with it as a Kindle version, and be able to study and linger on a page and think about it than go through somebody's video on it. The next one that I went on, number 9, is Color and Light in Nature. And the reason I bring this one up is this actually came originally from my favorite photographer I'm going to talk about in a little bit, Galen Ruel, who I also considered a mentor because I had a chance to work with him. He got me onto the concept of the eye, the brain, and vision. Some of you saw that talk that I did. All of that kind of thought behind the physics and the eye and the art and all those things coming together really started out with the first book he recommended, which was The Eye and Brain and Vision by David Hubel, who's kind of like the godfather of ophthalmology. And from there was something, Galen always seemed to know where the rainbow's happening, where the halos are going to be happening, and all these kind of these optical phenomena that would happen. And it was Rainbows, Halos, and Glories by Robert Greenlair. I think it's Robert Greenlair. That was kind of the first of this. And then this book started to take over in terms of color and light and nature. And what I love about this is it really gives you the opportunity to plan your photography. Because, as we all know, if we've done enough kind of landscape photography, when the minute you see the storm go through and you're thinking, okay, rainbows are coming because the sun's coming out, what you might, whether you know it or not, kind of instinctively, or you've read about it, The only times you ever actually see rainbows following thunderstorms is early or late in the day. And the reason for that is because of where the anti-solar point is. So the sun has to be lower in the sky so that the anti-solar point is close enough below the horizon so that the arc of the rainbow actually shows above the horizon, which is why we see these things in early morning, and in the evening. Or if you're on the shore, as we often are, if you have the light behind you and it's low light, you can be looking for rainbows and the crashing waves and the spray. So that was one of the things I learned from him, as to, where do you start looking for some of these things so that it's not just luck that it happens to be to get there. It's actually some forethought and knowledge about, how these actual optical phenomena occur. The next book, I think we probably all have this on our bookshelf, or electronically or in some form or fashion. Martinez is kind of the definitive go-to in terms of if you wanted a reference manual. I could never read this straight from start to finish, but he has everything in there. Everything from post-processing, which is why, having the most recent one, I think he's on the 6th now, I've got the 5th, becomes relatively important to have from the latest edition. So you have the latest post-processing techniques, but he also just covers a lot of everything about underwater photography. So I kind of look at it as kind of the definitive go-to resource, but it can be overwhelming, especially for new photographers, when you're giving them, somebody says, hey, I want to start out in this, and you hand Martinez's book to them. They're just overwhelmed. They go out and they start drinking heavily if they haven't already started because of the pandemic. So it's one of the latter resources that I give to people, but it's a great one. This one, and Paul, I'll go back to you with the color. Everything you talked about, it's kind of fascinating, because when I was up on Mohegan Island this summer, I stopped in at this artist, one artist gallery, and started talking to her a little bit. And it was really funny because we started talking about color and understanding color and the use of color. And I said, oh, there's one book that I've always really, really liked that it's simple. It's a relatively short, and you'll notice on the top of this, I've got the page numbers to give you an idea as to just how much of an undertaking they are. And I said, yeah, it's Joseph or Joseph. And she goes, Albers. I was like, oh my God. She goes, oh, he is the definitive work on color. This book is eye-popping in terms of understanding how to use color in art. And you see it referenced all over the place in other works of, arts and about artists and art, and how to become artists and fundamentals of art and all those things. If you have any book that you want to get to really understand color, and instead of just, saying, okay, I've got a color wheel and they show it to me on the Pantones and, Photoshop, what does it really mean? This is the definitive place to go to it. It's really a fascinating book. And you can spend, like I said, you read one of these kind of short, brief chapters, and it will occupy you for quite a bit. The next one I picked up, it's a used book. I don't even know if it's available anymore, but there's other ones like it. And this is also why I like going to the MFA. Is I really like learning all this stuff and then walking into museums or looking through a book like this, and you can see, it basically covers artists from the 1300s all the way through to, the mid 80s, and I think that's probably when this thing was, last published. In terms of, and it's the stuff that I don't like. Picasso, can't stand Picasso. I understand, I recognize talent. When he did more kind of realism, brilliant. And so he obviously has the capabilities and the skills, but his later stuff for me just never motivated me. But I still find the techniques and the thoughts behind it that are described in these kind of books, and this book in particular, fascinating in terms of learning. So I even look at the ones that I don't like, just for an opportunity to learn a little bit more about art. This I put as 5 and 5.5, and it's more, this goes back to kind of the bookmark piece of of this presentation. Wet Pixel, I think probably all of us have seen Wet Pixel and Dive Photo Guide. Between those two, it covers just about everything online that you would want in terms of diving into specific articles, resources. I also really like the forums for those of us that, are gearheads that, we go to the next available model or whatever it happens to be as fast as we can. And there's a classified section to actually sell your old gear on. And I've had pretty good success selling stuff there and also buying things from that classified forum. But these two sites I just found as probably the most comprehensively useful ones that I've got out there. And by the way, I always talk fast, and you guys have probably noticed that, but if you want to just jump in and interrupt me with a question at all, you don't have to wait to the end, that's fine. The other thing I thought is, as I'm going through this, recognizing that Matt and Andy are going to send this out as a recording, is this is something you can always pause. and take a look at if you want to, write down what the particulars are in terms of the publisher, the title, or whatever. And toward the end is I do have a document that I'm going to share that if you guys are interested. Living with art, this to me is the equivalent of taking a foundation course in art. If I was doing a freshman year in any art school, Galen, I don't know if it's Geitlin, again, all my knowledge comes from reading as opposed to listening to people. It's probably the most comprehensive, everything you need to know about the basics of art. And you can tell by the fact that it's 572 pages. And if you want to get an idea, it's not even just 572 pages, it's 572 pages of very thin pages. So it's one of those ones where you tear easily as you rip through the book, but a lot of great subject matter just in terms of understanding art and artists. And he also touches on kind of the great works and the masterpieces and how it relates back to all the concepts and techniques and things that he discusses earlier in the volume. This one, by the way, is probably one of the most expensive ones to try to find even used. And I've got the 11th edition, and I think we might be up to the 17th at this point. The number of the edition really doesn't matter that much because there's a kind of incremental changes from what I've been able to tell. But Lord, the cost, because this is still a very active textbook, and the mini talk textbook, you're talking in hundreds of dollars for people. This is the book that I would go to if somebody says, hey, I'm starting out, I want to know as much as I can about underwater photography, and I want it to be really practical. Alex Mustard, I think, always does a great job, whether it's doing his podcasts or his short video things with Adam Hanlon, or in terms of the book that he actually put together. It talks specifically about situations. He covers things like gear a little bit, but his gear thing is more the practical stuff is, how do you take care of it and what do you look for, and how do you prevent the leaks and those kind of things, as opposed to the very rigorous study that like a Martin Edge does in terms of every possible type of gear, equipment and what it's for and how it's all handled and the physics behind it, and defining God and giving like 5 examples. So this is one of those books that it's relatively short. Do I have a copy of it? No. It's a relatively short book. It's very a lot of images in it, so you can quickly gain the concepts that he's talking about. But I think he just presents it in a very simple, straightforward way. And for people that are kind of starting out, or even people that are kind of expert in this, want to look and see just kind of his techniques and his perception of things, I found it kind of invaluable, which is why it's hitting it at number 3. It is one of my favorite kind of go-to underwater books, and it's also the one that when I'm on the plane, I have it as a Kindle edition. I'll just scroll through it again, going, do I really remember everything about close focus, wide angle? Do I really remember everything about kind of lighting techniques, things like that? I really enjoy that. This one I don't really need to talk much about because this was really the basis of the, if you were unfortunate enough to actually see my previous presentation where I talked about kind of the photography, the eye, the brain, and vision. So much of it was based on Margaret Livingston's book. She worked with David Hubel, that godfather of photography I mentioned earlier. And this is all about how art is when art is created, when the brain perceives it, and how the eye actually like captures it and the brain perceives it. And all about like why optical illusions occur, and really a lot of techniques that when you look at, they're fascinating in their own, but I found that they translated so much to what we actually see in art and what great masters have been doing for years and years and years and have been passing down, and they knew empirically. Whereas she goes into kind of the science behind a lot of it, and a lot of that science is really in the past 20 years. And I just found that kind of just fascinating in terms of tying those together. And it also gave me, if I could summarize this book, it gave me the best understanding of why I break composition rules. Like, we've all got those rules of composition. And this one was the one I was like, okay, this is, everybody says, oh, break the rules, so you'll know when. And you're like, I'll never know when. This book actually gives you a good insight into why it's okay to break this rule in this case, because you're going to do something because of the way your eye works with your brain and the way that it interprets what you're seeing in front of you. So one of my favorites. My absolute favorite, and it's an older one, and unfortunately Galen Repel and his wife are no longer with us because they died in a plane crash flying back into Bishop, California. I think that troubled me. That's one of those things where you hear like a famous person, other than Olivia Newton-John. I grew up in the 70s with Olivia Newton-John. Hearing that Galen Repel died, or John Denver, those were ones I was like, wow, that really kind of like had an impact. And it was a sad loss for the world because I don't know if many of you know it, but Galen was really the one that brought the concept of a graduated neutral density filter to photography, to mainstream, and why it's in Photoshop and why we haven't created. He worked with Bob Singh out of Florida to create something because he was a mountaineering photographer. He was a mountaineer first. He's all sorts of records and all sorts of, conservationists and all that, but he was really known as a climber. And he always wanted a camera that, with him and to capture and record the events. And he's using small ones, and it was a 35 millimeter instead of the big formats at the time. And so he was always like, well, how do I do this? And now I'm in these mountain light with, huge dynamic range, and film just isn't cutting it. So he developed the graduated neutral filters in order to help him in those hard, situations, and then become much more, commercialized. This book, not only was he just an inspiring person, and by the way, he was a great person. He was just one of those people that always gave time, as famous as he had become as a Nat Geo photographer, and as just one of the graceful, most gracious, nicest people I've ever met. He goes into, in this book, a lot into his inner vision and how he sees and how he composes and what he's thinking of and the process that he goes through. And it's half technical things that, they apply to film. It also applies to digital, but it's in the film days. But it's half inspiring. I read this book like the way we read, some books, today about diving and the feats that some of these technical divers have done, or cave divers have done. And I find Galen's kind of description and really easy style of writing really inspiring. And it helps me actually rejuvenate my passion for photography when I find myself kind of in a slump. I'll go back to a book like this and just kind of start reading, and I get kind of excited again, knowing just how much fun, he brings to it. One bonus round that I bring up is there's this person, Dan Scott, and he has something called the Draw Paint Academy, and he monetized it in terms of he does certain newsletters and everything else that you can subscribe to, but he also has a lot of free resources, and I subscribe to his newsletter on the Great Masters, and I want to say it's not daily, but like once a week. I'll get a newsletter from Draw Paint Academy that goes in depth on a certain piece by a great master. There's other things that I do that I love on his site. It's a great resource, but I love the interpretation of why this great master created this piece in this way and what it means and how it fit into the, why in the time that it was contemporary when it was made. How it was influenced by the time and the history that in which it was made, as well as techniques and available materials and all those things. And he does it from a perspective as an oil painter, which I always find that I like learning. I've learned more probably about photographer from non-photographers in many ways than I have from anyone. And I find that listening to him describe the process of creating his oils is as informative to me as a photographer as any of these art or photography books. So if you haven't subscribed to this guy's newsletter, and you'll just test it out and you'll see what I mean. I think you'll find it a great resource. The second double bonus round, and I actually reached out. It was something that Asli Erdogan, a lot of you guys know, and Ed Yu, and I, we often dive together, and we put together a shared Google Doc that we'd be glad to, you can send your email address to Matt and Andy, and we can send this out to you and share the document with it. But over time, what we started to do, and you can kind of see it down here as I click over here, you can kind of see down on the left-hand side of the screen in terms of the table of contents. The local dive shops and those kind of things is kind of obsolete now because of the great work that Markine's done with the I Dive New England site, which has just become a phenomenal resource in those senses, in that sense. But what we do have in there is apps that we really like, that we rely on, and it's both as a landscape, a macro photographer. Ed does a lot of insects, so does Asli. A lot of wildlife, like Asli does. A lot of underwater resources, for apps for that. Andy, yours is in there, obviously. And then also just some of the resources like I just talked about here in terms of books that we really like, or bookmarks, or web pages that we really enjoy, or resources, even if there's something physical like the Boston Museum of Fine Arts that we like to go to just to learn more about this. So that's going to be the end of this one. And I'm going to go back to unsharing this thing and take any questions if I have it. And hopefully that was within a decent amount of time.
Wow. That was wonderful. That was wonderful. It was a lot of information.
I'll take a breath now, Andy.
Excellent.
I have something to add. This is Aslı.
Yeah.
At Red Pixel have a YouTube channel, and Alex Mustard, along with another person who's a staff in Red Pixel. They have like they upload photos or videos like every few days with like his experiences or like his reviews on new products, etc. That's very useful as well, which I follow occasionally.
I think that's what he does with Adam Hanlon.
Oh yeah, Adam Handler, yeah.
Yeah, those are, and they're quick. They're like 10 minutes long on here's the anglerfish and why people have trouble turning it on and off or whatever. Yeah, it's a great resource, honestly.
Yeah, it's like they talk about like all different kinds of things related to underwater photography. It's very useful, yeah.
Yeah. Any other questions? Or should we go back and play that at like half speed so that it's in a normal voice instead of like Dino from the Flintstones?
Oh, that was terrific, Tom. Really was.
All right.
And in conjunction with Paul's, that's terrific. A great way to start. So you're talking about for everyone to see, you know, the value of color and now how to look at things, how to look at images or why images are pleasing. And which it's a perfect segue into Daryl's, where Daryl now shows how to do this, how to photograph, how to compose. So I think it's a perfect one. So before we begin, Tom, I want to thank you. That was a great presentation. Terrific.
Thanks. And if my microphone was weird, I think it's because the wrong one was on. So
There's only a couple of times was it a little garbled, and afterwards it was fine.
okay.
So you're okay.
Yeah, I keep forgetting which one to change to. One is really good and one is just easy.
Yeah. Yeah, I was doing that earlier when I first joined the Zoom.
Okay.
Andy, we ready?
We are, and so now, you know, we've all seen a lot of over the years, Daryl's images, Daryl's wonderful explanations on photo editing, whether it's Lightroom, dark table, or different Photoshop techniques. So I thought this was would be a perfect beginning also. And one more thing before you begin, Daryl, is that what we've talked about, Daryl, Matt, Whitney, and I, is since we are now, you know, going to have been recording the meetings, and Matt will soon be putting them all together so that it'll be easy for anyone to check out one of the meetings that they've missed or any topic that they would like to revisit. And so what we're hoping to do is to even though, of course, you know, we've been doing Photo Society for a long time, and we have talked about composition. We have talked about subject selection. I've done a few of them also. But it's, number one, it's some of these are worth revisiting. And the other is that we have a lot of new people. And so we can't say to the new people, yeah, we've already did that. Oh, we did that 10 years ago. You know, that doesn't cut it. So what we're trying to do now is to go over some of these basic techniques, concepts, and so that we will have them recorded. So then when new people begin, we'll have some place to point them, and we will revisit them, but revisit the topics, but still it gives us some place for people to look if they want some information, if they don't want to read any of those books that Tom just mentioned. All right, so Daryl, fire away.
Okay, I think you will find this very interesting. My presentation tonight is about photography, composition, concepts, and use. Now, this is another fundamental topic. I've done a couple for Andy. He asked me to cover this one at the start of the year because it's something that we can reflect back on as the year progresses. Typically, Andy has me present last because they have a tendency to go over time. So I'm going to stay to script best I can.
Not to worry.
And hopefully we'll have a discussion towards the end because we do all have our own ideas about composition. But I do think you will find some very interesting parallels tonight with the presentations by the other speakers tonight, especially some books that were just mentioned. So I clicked the right screen. So composition, it's a photography fundamental. Basically, there is much could be said about composition for effective image composition. I am sure there people in attendance have many of their own thoughts, so feel free to laugh at me as I go on. However, it really comes down to an art as much as a science. Thus, there are no rules. There are just guidelines, concepts. Rules are for breaking. Though there are many people have presented on composition in the past, including Andy, I feel I'm going to take a much different informative track by rooting the topic with some science, unfortunately. And that hopefully that will make it much easier to understand exactly why composition works. Because it's very hard to see all these concepts and actually understand why they're meaningful. Why do they actually make a photograph better? So every time you take a photograph, doesn't matter your level of photography, you're already thinking about composition and the concepts of composition, not cutting off someone's head. That's composition, honestly. Now, in our mind's eye, before we take a photograph, we already have an idea of what our ideal photograph of that's going to be. And that is what we compare our end results to. Now, a lot of us have said, it's a great photograph, but it doesn't really match what I was hoping for. Well, what you probably ran into is composition. Of course, typically when we're comparing, at least underwater, you're going like, well, it's good enough, it's great, satisfactory, or just delete it now. So how that final image compares to your aesthetic that you imagined is the art of where the art of composition exists. So the reason why composition is important is that you can take a very sharp, in focus, properly exposed photograph of an interesting subject, does not also equate to the most compelling image. It's great for a fish identification photograph that is in a book or a mobile app like Andy's. But the glamour shot that we all want of the same fish, but not the glamour shot of the same fish you would see in a magazine. The difference is composition, many times. So what makes good composition? I will try to simplify this by looking at just 2 or 3 core attributes of good composition, which is allowing the image to look natural. Don't try to do stuff that makes it look artificial, because you're taking a photograph in a natural environment. So there's no reason why it can't look natural. So we're allowing it. Making the image look compelling. There's concepts to do that. And having the image tell a story. And that is probably the hardest one. So where composition makes this possible is actually science. It's actually biology, sociology. Humans read information from imagery in specific ways. Our brains are hardwired to read information in those ways. And the techniques of composition just make the image easier to read and therefore makes our brains happy. And we all like happy brains, right? For an example of how just hardwired our brains are, let's look at a barrel sponge. First thing you saw is a barrel sponge, right? Well, most people say they saw a face. That is the hardwire aspect of our brains that is developed from nature for us to see predators and stuff like that. Of course, a lot of the people, presenters and stuff here know this is an example of pareidolia, which is our brain's capability of seeing faces very quickly. And this type of thing occurs when we see a photograph. Our brain doesn't analyze, is the photograph like piece of sheet music? So this is the fun. I love science. Okay, so composition concepts. There are many. There are a lot of them are self-named rules that can be used in combination. Once again, there are no rules or guidelines. They can be intermixed. Yet I know that that doesn't resolve the confusing aspect of all these concepts. So let's take a breath. Remember, we are having fun here. So let me scale this down. So let's talk about the top 2 concepts that I find useful from the following 3 categories. Framing concepts. So framing concepts, basically simple placement of subjects in the photographic scene. All the lines you see here, I will discuss what they come from because there's science. Subject selection, how many, where the subjects are in that photographic scene, how many you have, we'll touch on that. Orientation, angle of objects in your photographic scene. We'll go over that. Okay, let's talk about being creative with how you take a photograph and how you crop it. So many cameras have the capability of showing what is called the rule of thirds, which is the grid you see here that divides the photograph into 9 blocks or 4 grid intersections. Now, having the grid is not important. But it helps you train yourself to think about composition in this way. The concept is to have points of interest, which for humans is normally the eyes or the eyes of a subject near one of the intersections. In this photograph here, they just have the lionfish near one of those intersections. And I will talk about the swim space in just a minute, because that is very important also. Now, it is not important to precisely put the eye on the grid, okay? Once again, the rules are made to be broken when it comes to this. We're looking for something that's natural. So breaking the rules makes you a good photographer, be an artist. So let's talk about how this makes this for a more natural scene. Let me start adding some science in here. So this little spiral you see here is where this actually comes from. And if for those of you that have seen this before, this is actually the Fibonacci sequence. And what makes this natural is it exists all through nature. It's used, the Fibonacci is used for fractals, for supercomputing, even takes advantage of it, for replicating structures and stuff. It is literally mathematical beauty in my mind and how it works. Okay, so from the golden spiral, as I've known, these grids exist. The actual one that relates directly to it is called the golden section, which, as you can see, that is the one in the middle. The rule of thirds is just a much more widened version of that. Once again, giving you some easy way to place objects in the photographic scene. Now, there's additional things known as the golden triangles, and even the reverse of that. This author is calling it the harmonious triangles, but these are names by themselves alone. And I will talk a little bit about this and how it can be used. So let me quickly talk about swim space. So remember I said you got to break the rules? Well, you want to get the point of interest, the eye of your subject close to one of those grids, just alignment. But then you want to move it back a little bit to make sure you put appropriate swim space in front of well, the fish that's swimming, or if it's crawling on the ground, if it's a lobster. Our brains need to see that swim space to be able to sell the photograph as real, because that's just how our brains work. So a little more space in the direction is basically makes it natural. By the way, I do want to say a lot of these photographs, I did not take these photographs. I found some very good ones that were already set up for doing this. I have a full list of my references that I've included at the bottom of my slides for the photographs. And then at the end, I will have a bibliography of all my references that I've used, which are actually a lot of the same ones that were just mentioned by Tom. Okay, let's move on. So
I was going to add, I saw Brent Durand as your reference. I almost had him on there because he's a fun guy to watch.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about some subject selection stuff. So for what it makes perfect sense, pick subjects you can get closer from, you can get farther from, depending on what you're trying to do. And we're just kind of layering this on top of what we just did, because that's the ideas of composition is layers on top of, you're not following just one rule. You're trying to add many elements to your photographic scene. So if you're doing macro photography, you want to get closer. If you're doing wide angle photography, you might want to back up a little bit so you can get more into the scene to make it more interesting. It's not always you can get 3 sharks, but I thought it was a very good example. This also has to do with a little rule that Andy came up with, which he called the rule of 3. Now, the rule of 3 is not to have 3 of the same subject in the frame, but have 3 different items in the frame to basically add more interest. You typically want to do this by having a major one up front, forefront in the photographic scene, and then the rest of them to backwards. Now, the reason why this is important is that the brain doesn't want to make decisions on what to look at first. It's hardwired, once again, to always look at the one that's forefront first. The one that is closest to us is the one that has danger, therefore the brain looks at that one first. And it looks at it in the eye. So we're taking advantage of that to build a better composition of the photograph. But in the same thing you said, you do want to, if you can, get the subjects at slightly different distances from the lens. I do want to say one thing about the rule of 3 is that the number 3 shows abundance without being overtaxing for the frame, for the photographic scene. So it works out to be a very good number for that. The last concept I want to talk about is comparative perspective. Now, this typically has to do with wide angle photography, but you could use it for macro and stuff, is to use something that's a known commodity in the photographic scene. Typically that is done with another diver. So in this case here, you're using your dive buddy to produce a relative perspective on the size of that shark. So once again, it is best to have the main subject in the foreground, one of them. So the first thing your brain sees, it compares it to the other subject being your dive buddy, which we will call chum. And then you think your brain automatically says, boy, that is a big shark for chum to be so close to. Good thing he's over there. Okay, so let's add an additional layer on top of our compositional toolkit. So to make the photograph more interesting, You don't want to be taking it at a straight line. There are no regular straight lines in nature. There are, of course, granite, stuff like that that can break straight, but in nature, no regular straight lines. So if you do that and you're making a photograph that looks like it's something of a fish ID photograph, it's not going to be the best composition. So try different angles, try to get low to the sand. Try not to look down at the fish. It typically doesn't work out too well unless there's something specific you want to get in frame by doing that. Typically, it's going to be much more compelling to be looking sort of up at the fish, which is kind of harder for today's digital cameras where you're looking for a little screen. I know with my camera, I actually have a mirror on it, so I can look at my camera in the sand and be looking straight down at it and compose my photograph to be able to do this type of stuff. Don't be afraid of photographing subjects from odd angles either. Of course, the fish might turn and you might have to do an odd angle, which is what normally happens, but try to pick something that works compositionally. What's really nice about this photograph here is that you do have the aspects that we just talked about in the other concepts. You do have your dive buddy or another diver in the background. So therefore you have a foreground in the background. And I will talk about a little more about this type of photography in just a little bit, because I do feel this compositionally close-up wide angle has a lot to be said. Okay, so yep, close-up wide angle. Here's another example, the same thing. Looking up at the subject, nice background more in the distance. The subject is right in the foreground, easy to see, your eye just catches it. The color helps, of course, also. One of the speakers was talking about color. You can take advantage of that, but I wanted to limit what we're discussing. There's also a capability of leading converging angles. I'm going to try to get into that just a little bit. It really depends on your background, not necessarily on how you shoot the thing, but I'm trying to stick to what you can easily control. So let me go over some general stuff, trying to put it all together. So the best time to think about composition is when you first take the photograph, because just like editing the photograph, you can fix small mistakes, but not big mistakes in post-production. So try to get your composition right. Try to understand what you want out of the photograph when you first take it. And then you can make slight tweaks in post to help the photograph. So let's put it all together step by step. The first thing I do want to say is, before we get started, that I would be remiss not to mention that to get comfortable thinking about these things, being comfortable, concentrate on your diving safe before delegating thought to photography is best. I don't want anyone getting into trouble by thinking too much about composition and not about diving safely. Safety is also concerned with me when it deals with people that might be spending too much time on their camera underwater. I've had friends die. Okay, so let's pretend that we are diving, and we came across this nice little nudibranch, which I think is a flabellina, that has just been courteous to pose for us on this one little piece of seaweed here. So nice of him or her. So hermaphroditic, So let's go through what we just talked about step by step. We can get closer. So, and I have the rule of thirds frame already up here because most cameras have that capability of doing that. Once again, the grid doesn't really matter. It's just a training aid. It's training wheels. I've already posed the frame that I want, that I'm going to move in on this poor little nudibranch. I've tried to give him swim space. Of course, I'm getting close to try to get more stuff. I've added, areas of interest, which is rhinophores, or near one of the grids is his butt, I guess we'll call that, is on the other side of the grid. So he's kind of matching up there. Plus, he also has an angle. He's at a natural orientation because he's going downhill. So this actually works. So here's what he looks like when I move in a little bit closer, or if you're doing post, you would crop it. This is what he would look like once I edited the photograph, just kind of normalized it as far as the what's bright and what's dark. And it's a very interesting subject. Now, of course, there's much better nudibranchs. I know that Andrew is taking thousands at this point, but this is just an easy example and something we definitely see around here on the in New England. So let me reintroduce something. So the grid you're seeing now is the golden sections, again, based upon the Fibonacci, are also on that end, the purple. I keep forgetting this is red. Hopefully no one is colorblind. Is what they call the triangles, the golden triangles or whatever. And the point here is that you really want something to look natural. You don't want it on those straight lines. So they want you to have an orientation, an angle on it. And just happily enough, this nudibranch has already posed himself in the perfect orientation for the grid. But once again, the idea is not to match the grid. It's just a training aid. But it is good not to have things that's level, give it a good angle. The brain likes things that are moving down more so than they're trying to move up, because that feels a little more iffy to the brain. Remember, these are concepts, not rules. So let me talk a little bit about wide angle. So for wide angle scenes, there's normally more space. So you can try a few more concepts very easily. One of these, and once again, these are not my photographs, but they worked out quite well for this. So this photograph here is great because though there's not 3 sea stars, the sea star is very upfront, is in the forefront. There is lots of life that catches your eye. There is a visual drop off that makes it much easier for your eye to orient directly on the sea star. As funny as that sounds, it's the lack of information in the background that helps sell the photograph more. It's unfortunate that, for a zoom and stuff, the colors do get a little more crushed than the original photographs. That's an unfortunate thing about it. Now, if I applied the same concepts and I put the angle on here, you notice that this photographer actually almost followed that golden angle almost precisely. They did not try to really align it to the grid, but they did sort of get the center of the sea star near the grid anyways. So it is actually matching a lot of the canned aspects of proper or pleasing composition. So let's look at another quick example. Once again, wide angle photography, you have the ability of getting a subject in focus or semi-in focus in the background. Once again, this photographer used their dive buddy or just some other diver passing by. They were lucky enough to find 2 similar fish that are actually bordered by, looks like 2 anemones, which is great. I can tell this is nice cold water, nice green water, which is what I'm used to. It even might be Pacific Northwest based upon the size of this one nudibranch. This guy, oops, sorry, not nudibranch, sea anemone, this guy right here. Once again, you know, these guys are well lit. I did want to get into a lot of lighting stuff because it doesn't really fall much into composition, but it does work. That's the first thing your eye catches. And then your eye moves on to the rest of the scene, including the diver up above. It's eye candy. Interesting enough, the photographer does have a slight angle to where the fishes are. Well, one is a little bit lower than the other. So once again, the eye does go to one of the fish first of all, then the second fish, then the rest of the scene. I say angel. I said angels of interest. That's interesting. No angels, please. Okay, so as Andy talked about, I do a lot of presentations on Lightroom. I've also done some on Darktable, which is a freeware version of what Adobe Lightroom does. So I'm going to switch monitors real quick. So give me a minute. The reason I'm doing this is that if I pick one of my other monitors, you will actually be able to see move this out of the way. You'll actually be able to see the gauges much better than my higher resolution monitor. I'm just thinking of you guys. Okay, so here we are in Lightroom. And I have the crop feature on, which is this right here, the regular cropping tool. Now, you know all those guides we talked about? Well, they exist in Lightroom. Here's the rule of threes guides. On a Windows computer, Alt-0, whoops, I have to actually be Lightroom. Alt-0 allows me to change those grids. Of course, there we go. So there's your golden angles grid. There's your golden sections grid, which is the tighter version of the rule of thirds grid. And then if I actually keep going through, whoops, I think I just went past it. And my computer is beeping every time I do this for some reason. You will actually see the golden spiral in Lightroom also. So if you want to do anything in post, you do have these little guidelines to try to, you know, these training wheels to help you along. I will switch back to the rule of thirds here. Trying to keep this simple. Okay, so what I have here as a subject is a little rock gunnel. Now, the reason I picked this as an example is that, you know, I'm doing this with a digital SLR, or actually a large full frame mirrorless camera. And of course, you know, something as long as a little rock gunnel, the tail is not in focus, but the face is nice and focused. So, you know, what is the proper composition for this little guy? Now, I will admit that it's one fish. It's not like I have multiple subjects and stuff, but it does bring up upon one thing that photographers do have to deal with is, you know, is it better to show the whole fish, or is it better to crop down and just get the in focus portions of the fish? What is a better photograph? So, oops. Oh, and by the way, you can of course you can orient stuff. So anyways, I could do this. Let me actually, this is the reason why I had a joke about, you know, praying to the demo gods, because something's always going to go wrong when you try to do a demo in Lightroom. So anyways, I could have something like this. I could even, you know, stretch out the crop a little bit more. So, I mean, that would make a respectable photograph, but compositionally, you know, the head is way down here. The item of interest, the point of interest, which is for the human brain, is way down here. It just does not work compositionally. So that almost forces us down to wanting to do something like this. Now, we want to give the little fish some swim space. So around here would probably be pretty good because we can't go any lower. You can just kind of play with that, you know, what you think is optimizing everything that you have. And, you know, it's not always best to have everything centered, but I'd have to say that. And of course, this is all subjective. You're being an artist at this point. You're not being a photographer for a degree. Okay, so this would be the photograph. Of course, I would try to fix it up, see if there's any backscatter, but that's how you would do post compositionally within Lightroom. So if I jump back to my presentation. Oops, I picked the wrong monitor. There we go. Okay, so that's where it was before, and question time. I tried to keep this kind of short and sweet so that, you know, because everyone has a concept on composition. It is not an exact science. It is very much art. It is breaking any of the rules that people have set forward and balancing concepts. So I open it up to questions.
First off, let me just begin by saying, well done. That, you know, you covered the composition concept very well and explained it very well. And you're right, it is art. Well, somebody say art, maybe use an R in there. And it is, but it is in the eyes of the beholder, you know, and so what works for one doesn't work for another. And I think you did a great job.
Yeah, Ray chiming in. Yeah, Daryl, awesome presentation, great presentation of concepts. One thing that I found unsettling in one of the photos, and it was one of the early ones on Daryl, of the lionfish, and the photographer had turned the photo so that the lionfish kind of caught that spiral, and that was good. But I was unsettled by the fact that the horizon, or the seabed, was now no longer, you know, along a gravitational plane.
Right.
I know underwater there's so many different angles. Yeah. That you kind of don't have the same concept as horizon as you do, you know, above water. So it maybe it's not strong, but for me, it was like, I needed to turn my head. I didn't, but that's just my reaction to it. I mean, in terms of your discussion and in the other angles, it certainly fit that. But for me, that was still unsettling.
Yeah, it's a very good point, Ray, is that, you know, you can go too far. If you don't want to be changing the orientation of the horizon, if it's that apparent, because that's going to throw, your brain's going to throw its equilibrium off trying to look at the photograph. Because, you know, that's one of the things that, you know, happens to people. That's seasickness, when the horizon is changing different than your inner ear. So that's a very good point. You do have to be careful of that. A free swimming fish, you probably are not going to want to do what this photographer did, Elizabeth here. It is very possible. Yeah, when I grabbed this, I made the comment that I didn't feel this was a great example of using the grid. but it was very contrasty. Therefore, you could see the grid very easily. So I decided to use it. It wasn't technically perfect, but I figured that I would be covering more technically perfect composition later on.
Yeah, if you could talk to the fish to move a little bit, rotate a little bit to the left, it would work, but maybe the fish wasn't cooperating.
Oh, show of hands, who wants to talk to a lionfish? Most of us would just rather not see them, except where they were supposed to be.
Right. Exactly. Anyone else have, Paul, do you have a question?
Yeah, well, just a comment. I think it's a great presentation, and I think so much of what you've said applies to anybody who's taking video, because amateur videographers just keep moving the camera around.
Yes.
And the news crews I used to work with at Channel 4 and in TV news taught me to try to avoid, because I would learn from them as well about video, although I'm not really a great videographer, but they would try not to move the camera very much. And they treated it kind of like a bunch of stills and let the action. Now, obviously, sometimes if you're following somebody, you have to move the camera. But I think a lot of what you've said about still composition really applies to video. One photographer told me that it was like blinking. We see things and then we'll look over here and blink. He said, treat it that way. So you're getting different. You're using the sensibilities of still photography to video, rather than, if you see a lot of videos that are amateur videos that keep doing this, and it just drives you crazy.
Yeah, there's actually
what you said applies to a lot of things people are doing.
Yep.
Not just stills, but video.
A very good point. Actually, I just put in the chat a bunch of the links to the documents that I found. They were very good on discussing, introduction to composition. One of the articles is actually from the Dive Photo Guide on using composition for videography. That actually covers that. Of course, when you're doing videography, as you just mentioned, it's a little bit harder because you got moving subjects, you got a moving background. You don't have as much control as we have as photographers, but I actually came from videography and then started doing still photography. That actually, funny enough, is I'm old enough to have actually used that celluloid stuff they used to call film. I actually was looking for one of the old can cartridges behind my bookshelf, and I got rid of them. It's funny enough, but anyway, when I started with video, doing digital, it was actually digital videography, and my camera allowed me to take stills on the digital camcorder. So that's how I started still photography, is from my video work.
Can I give kind of a counterpoint? I mean, this is one of those things where like we all want to just go have a beer and this is where we all talk. Can I give a counterpoint to the lionfish thing?
Sure.
So pull it up, because I find that that's an interesting. It's what you said about kind of that seasickness and you're disquieting with the unlevel horizon. I have a mutual friend that I'm always beating on, because I'm like, oh, is the water in the world running off to the right? Because the horizon of the ocean is never right, exactly. But I find it interesting when you look at that lionfish. I wonder if it's because we know lionfish are relatively docile, they don't really move fast. But if that had been a shark, I think that angled horizon actually would have provided, because it gives a sense of motion. So I'm like, and it's like, if that had been a shark and a fast moving fish, it would almost feel like a dog, like a fighter coming in and swooping down. I didn't like all the space to the right. I would have cropped it in and given that so much swim space. But I found that I kind of found that interesting, because I thought it was like, yeah, it was disquieting, and I love the seasickness analogy, but it gives a sense of motion. And if it fit with a faster fish, I think it would have been different.
Yeah. So as you see in the bottom, this is actually where that came from. This tutorial is the 5 basic composition tips. Be interesting to see if the author even said something with that. I don't remember they did, but I think you make a good point that if it was a shark, you would already be a little irked by it being a shark, and then having the background askew kind of adds to that. Especially if it's a nice shark with a nice open mouth, you know, showing off its pearly whites. Which, you know, of course, sharks can also be fairly docile.
Well, again, the underwater environment gives us a lot more flexibility because we're not oriented to a horizon necessarily. I mean, we could be at odd angles. The walls of a coral reef is going to be at odd angles, but the combination having the light come from the upper left, the ground being in the lower right, kind of threw me off in terms of orientations. But yeah, you're right. Underwater, we get all kinds of angles, and normally I probably wouldn't have been thrown off by that. But that was one reaction I had to that particular photo. Yeah, different dynamics, different fish, different scene. Yeah, you would probably have a different reaction.
I mean, let me just quickly pick one of the other photographs where I was showing, you know, working at a different angle. Like this one, that photograph is probably could be a little bit of an angle, but you wouldn't know it. You're just taking advantage.
Sharing your screen.
Nope. Am I not sharing the screen? Hold on, I thought I did. There we go.
Yeah.
So this is what photograph where you're taking advantage of being at a slight angle. Because looking at some of the seaweed, you know, this may not have been the actual orientation of where the person was. You really don't know. So you can sort of hide, you know, the background orientation a little bit on some photographs.
Right, and that works because that with all that kelp, it could be just current, so it could look real also.
Yeah, that one is definitely nice and flat. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people do very, you know, when it's out in the sand and stuff, you will find most photographs are doing fairly flat and stuff. But, you know, as you said, it adds a different dynamic if you're able to take an unusual angle on it. And that's typically the angle you want to be. You don't want to be skewing your camera too much. I didn't cover one thing, which is, you know, compositionally, don't be afraid to take a portrait photograph. These are being landscape, you know, it's a rectangle. Flip it on the end 90 degrees, that'd be a portrait. Don't be afraid of doing that if it's better for the subject, such as a nudibranch that's climbing up the stalk of something. That is still good composition. Now, even if you had that on an angle, if you don't see the background, then no one would ever know.
Thank you, Daryl. Thank you very much. First, before I begin, are there any other questions or any comments on Daryl's presentation? Okay. Before we wrap things up, there's two things. One, very quick. I mentioned about the Bon Air. And so some of you have, if you've recently gone up on air and you'd like to share some of your images for the Bon Air meeting in February, don't feel that you have to have 20 minutes worth of. If you have just a bunch that we could get to Matt, and then he'll put all that together, or at least arrange that, or send it to me, or whatever. So that I guess my point is, you don't feel you have to bring in or send 80 or 50 images, just a few, and everyone does that. It's just to give a little idea of what Bon Air is. And one other thing is that what we had talked about for future meetings is to give people, give the group an assignment, which gets a little tricky, but what I mean by assignment, let's say, after seeing some of these presentations along the way, whether the composition or editing and so forth, that we give the assignment for, give 2 months or a month, and you shoot macro. Shoot something on macro that reflects what we've been talking about. or wide angle. Now, the problem is not everyone dives around here. And then if they don't dive around here, they may not be going on any vacation soon. But if they don't dive here and are going on someplace, like I know Ellen Garvey is going to the Philippines in a few weeks. So she doesn't dive here, but she could do a macro thing, which I'll talk to her about. But that kind of thing. So let me know your thoughts on that, or send it to me, send it to Matt, about the idea of having some sort of a, I don't want to say purpose for diving, but an idea that you're trying to get, a task or a goal. And it doesn't have to be just those two, it could be anything. So anyway, thank you very much. This was wonderful. And again, Paul, wonderful presentation. Tom, Daryl, same. Great way to kick off this year. So thank you all. And thanks for those of you that are tuning in, and see you next month. Okay. Take care. And thanks again.
Take care, everyone.